The information provided on this podcast is for general informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. Reliance on any information provided here is solely at your own risk. Welcome to the Birth Baby Podcast. Each week, you'll find guidance, encouragement, and practical tools to support you through pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum journey. I'm your host, Ciarra Morgan, a certified birth and postpartum doula, hypnobirthing educator, and pediatric sleep consultant. I'm also the owner of a doula agency in Austin, Texas, and the founder of the Birth Baby Academy, where I offer classes for both parents and birth professionals. Thanks for being here. Hello, everyone. Today I have Heather Eure with me. She is a board-certified lactation consultant, postpartum and parent coach, educator, and mom of 3. For over a decade, she has supported new and growing families through their feeding and parenting journeys, and her work is evidence-based, neurodiversity-affirming, and LGBTQ plus inclusive. She has multiple certifications in perinatal mental health and brings a compassionate mental health and nervous system informed lens to every family she serves. I'm so excited to have her here today because she's going to be talking to us about bottles, which so many people are like, oh my God, there's so many options. What am I supposed to do about all of these bottles? So thank you so much for being here today, Heather.
Yeah, thank you. I'm genuinely excited to be here and I appreciate the opportunity to share my knowledge with your audience.
Yeah. So, the first thing is, what features should someone look for in a good quality bottle? And what features tend to cause problems? Because some of the ones out there sound like it's a really great idea, but it's a little bit of a nightmare.
Sure. So I think the top two things that I tend to look at are the nipple shape and the flow rate. And what I like to point out anytime I'm talking about bottles is that any information we have about bottles, like as the public and as parents, comes from marketing, okay? And that there's no standardization in the industry for any terms related to flow. Nothing is a medical definition, okay? And so it's up to us as consumers to kind of make those decisions. And so a lot of the bottles that if you go into somebody's house and you're going to see certain bottles in everybody's house, some of these bottles are, I think, quite horrible, actually. And it's really, we're led to believe that they're going to be great for our babies because of the marketing practices of those companies.
It's funny. I had Jess on for another episode, our postpartum doula, and she was saying the exact same thing about like bassinets and all of these different things. It's like, there's no standard here. They're using words like anti-colic and all of that. That's not regulated. These things that they're putting out there are not standardized across the board, just like nipple size and things like that. A Flow 1 on one bottle could be different than a Flow 1 on a different bottle. So are there certain materials, like there's plastic, glass, silicone, stainless steel? What do you prefer or what do you recommend avoiding?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I will say I don't see, so I'll talk in a minute about the nipple shape I kind of prefer, and that works for most babies for their kind of good oral motor functioning of the tongue, of the mouth. And I don't see too many bottles that are either silicone or stainless steel that have that kind of nipple. So I kind of almost just ignore that those, materials exist. And so for a lot of us, we're choosing between plastic and glass. Don't get me wrong, I love a good glass bottle, but I do think that glass can have its disadvantages, right? It's breakable, it's heavier. An older baby who's self-feeding probably shouldn't be holding a glass bottle. A lot of daycare providers, other childcare providers prefer you not to send glass. And so this is a decision I would kind of recommend. I want a family to make that decision based on their own values. It's tricky, right? We can get into conversations about like what kind of contaminants are in different bottles and also what kind of contaminants are in the world around us. I was reading a few Consumer Reports articles last night on bottles. And one of the experts in one of the articles mentioned, like, we can't shop our way out of, being exposed to these contaminants. And so I like for people to think about, hey, if I'm going to spend the extra money on the glass bottles, or I'm going to go out of my way for this inconvenience, what does that do for my family? What are the benefits that I'm really getting? I don't think there's a right answer. I think different families are going to choose plastic or glass just based on kind of what works for them and their overall values.
Yeah, I have a lot of families that are majorly anti-plastic. And it was funny. I had somebody else tell me, we get exposed just by like the air coming through the vents in our car. Like it's coming through a
Right.
plastic
It's
vent,
in our
you know,
water
it's
system. It's
everywhere.
in our
Yeah.
bodies. So it's tricky. And, I don't think we have enough information to say, do the risks of these things outweigh the benefits of, other aspects of this conversation?
Yeah. I had a mom, I remember being in the hospital with her, and she just had the best personality. She was super funny. And she was talking about organic onesies and things like that, and
Mhm.
how, there's organic cotton on every, you can get an organic option of a lot of things now. And she said, I'm too broke to be that bougie or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, or maybe she said, I'm too broke to be that woke or something like that.
Yeah.
She's like, as
Yeah.
much as I would love to, financially, it's just not doable. So, okay, that's helpful. So the glass has some benefits, but you're not sure that, some of the risks outweigh the benefits for some of those products.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And then there are venting systems and wide neck or narrow neck, and the bottle shape is different. Not even, you mentioned nipple shape, but even bottle shape can be different. Especially for families who are wanting to combo feed, which means like feeding their baby by
Right.
breast or by bottle, mixing it up. What do you recommend there?
Sure. And I'll talk first about the nipple shape and what I
Yeah.
like. And I will say that I tend to make the same recommendations for families regardless of how they're feeding. So if we have a family who is mostly exclusively breastfeeding, but maybe they're doing a bottle at night, like the partner comes home from work and wants to offer a bottle, or they're just doing a little, smattering of bottles throughout the week, all the way through a family who's exclusively bottle feeding, whether that's pumped milk or formula, I tend to make the same recommendations because bottles are important. Really, eating and suck function are important for a lot of things down the road, other than just like how many calories our babies are getting. If you look at how a baby is sucking, that is going to influence the development of like the muscles of the mouth, the jaw, the face, the development of the airway. And so I always kind of promote really the same things and the same feeding methods, which would be a nice paced or slow method that we can kind of walk through in a minute. I like to recommend bottles with more of a triangular shape. A nipple. And so I have a few examples that I can show. If you guys want to pop onto the YouTube channel and you'll get to kind of see the visual here. I'll try my best to describe it for those of you who are
It's
just
going to be like
listening in.
charades.
That's right. Yeah. So, and actually I realized I mostly just have bottles that are the ones I recommend, and I don't have too many examples of ones I don't recommend. But so for example, we've got something like, this is the Nuke Perfect Match. And I've heard people call, or talk about the triangle test, where you can kind of take your hands and put them in a triangle shape and see if the nipple mostly fills it up. Okay. So this to me meets that qualification. This is the Even Flow Balance Narrow Neck. Same thing, right? It mostly kind
That's
of
the one that I
fills
have a lot
up.
of people like.
Yeah, I like this one a lot. I have the narrow neck I'm sorry, this is the wide neck. I do have the narrow neck too, but what I realized, somebody pointed out to me, they're actually the same. If you
They
look
are.
at it, this wide neck just goes down farther.
That's so interesting.
The wide neck are sometimes out of stock, especially in glass. So if you can't find the wide neck, get the narrow neck. They're not a lot different.
I've also heard that with those, because it's like easier to find the top to the narrow neck, and that the wide neck is harder to find replacements for.
That's likely. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're often out of stock, and I'll end up like, texting a client like, oh, look, they're in stock at such and such place right now. I just saw them, like, let's grab some. This is the Lancino bottle, same kind of thing. It's nice, tapered. Okay. And even like a Dr. Brown's. Okay. So it's going to look really different, but it's a similar principle. If you look at it, right? The nipple just gradually slopes down to the base. So still it fits. It's not perfect. It's not quite the same, but it kind of fits the bill versus, and I wish I had something like a Komotomo to show you guys.
I was going to say, do you have a name of one that you don't like? So
I don't.
And
I will say a few years ago, we recommended the Komotomo across the board. And so for those of you who don't know what that looks like, it's got a really wide base. So this is not it. This is the Dr. Brown's wide neck. And then it's got a really skinny nipple. So it's a much more drastic angle, like almost like there's like a bend where it goes straight, and then comes out flat. The problem with bottles like this, and this is probably not the most sort of egregious bottle, but you can see that a baby really can only latch to the tip. Mm-hmm. And so what they're going to do is they're going to be using like their lips, the front of their mouth, and much more of a straw-like motion, as if they were sucking from a straw. If you can get a baby to get down lower on something like this, what you're going to find is there are these huge gaps now, right? We talked about how this doesn't quite meet the triangle test. Once again, this is not the most egregious offender. That's where we get a lot more swallowing of air, a lot more gassiness, things like that. And so I typically recommend starting with those bottles that have that more tapered shaped nipple. I will say there are some that have really different shapes, like maybe a MAM bottle that has the very smush nipple. I would never recommend those to somebody to start out with. But if you have a baby who's really having challenges taking a bottle, there may be cases where based on your baby's like anatomy, their oral motor functioning, we may suggest something that's not in this category because they can use some other like compensation methods to help them take those bottles. Okay. But if we're talking about like what you're registering for, I would say let's stick with those that are triangular shaped because you can see a baby can really get all the way down on here pretty far and it fills the palate or fills the mouth to promote good function, right? The tongue can really kind of do a wave-like movement. We call this peristalsis, like they do at the breast to remove milk rather than kind of like smushing it to extract the milk.
Yeah, and that would make sense for parents that are combo feeding and want to go back and forth between them. You don't want to have them just having this really narrow latch on a bottle and then you go to the breast and they're trying to do that latch on your breast. And that can cause some issues for mom as well, or the person that's feeding, correct?
Right. I feel it does. And I do always like to point out that, bottle feeding and breastfeeding, they are two totally different things. And as much as we can sit there and say, we're trying to make bottle feeding as much like breastfeeding as possible, none of these nipples I just showed you, I've never seen a breast that looks like any of those, right? No. It's just not possible. But yes, we want to promote good function so that when baby returns to breast, they're still using like that whole, like the whole tongue in a wave-like movement. They're using their jaw, they're using everything in kind of a correct or efficient manner. I will point out though, that once again, I was kind of thinking through this and thinking about, okay, we're talking to folks who are planning for what they're going to use for their babies. If you're already using a bottle, that's not something that is, I'm recommending or that other IBCLCs or birth professionals are recommending. If it's working, keep using it. It doesn't mean you have to change, what you're already doing.
My favorite saying is if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
I say that all the time. Like people will be like, oh, but this isn't the one that you have on your list. I don't care. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you like it and it's working for you.
Yeah, keep doing it.
Absolutely. So you mentioned, certain babies, if they're having a certain issue, may have an easier time with a bottle that maybe you're not recommending. What about as they age? Should the same bottle be able to go with them as they get older, or are different bottles better for different stages and ages?
In my experience, for the most part, we can stick with the same bottle as babies get older. Once again, like once a baby is self-feeding, I don't recommend glass bottles anymore. And I do agree that there are some babies who need an increase in the flow rate as they get older. I don't tend to go off what the boxes say, like, oh, this one's for 0 months, this one's for 3 months, this one's for 6 months. And if you can stick with a slow flow, that's great. But there are certainly babies who get to 2, 3, 4 months and they're impatient. Maybe they have a mom who has, a rapid letdown or just a really healthy milk production. Who knows what the reason is. But if you're finding that your baby is taking a very long time to take a bottle, and by that, I typically mean probably longer than 5 minutes an ounce. And for an older baby, maybe even a little less time, you might be able to try increasing the flow rate. And you can always try that. And you're going to just look out for signs of like, really struggling to coordinate sucking, swallowing, and breathing, right? Where there's like milk leaking everywhere, they're choking, they're kind of sputtering on the bottle. That might be a sign that the flow rate, you've gone up too high.
And you wanted to talk a little bit about the pace at which we're feeding babies. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think paced bottle feeding is so important. I teach this to all the families I'm working with. And once again, no matter what the feeding method is, because yes, absolutely, paced bottle feeding is going to promote good breastfeeding, okay? Because your baby's going to come back to breast and it's going to be, a slower flow. They're going to have patience for that flow from the breast. But paced bottle feeding also promotes healthy digestion, right? Sometimes when we're seeing gassiness and we're blaming like the venting system or the anti-colic system, or it's the wrong bottle, sometimes it's just the baby is eating too fast. And it's also going to reduce overfeeding. Okay. And we have some evidence to show that like overfeeding in infancy may contribute to health concerns later, like obesity. I think that research is all kind of still up in the air, but we do want to make sure that we're feeding babies an appropriate volume. So I have a couple of methods of paced feeding that I really like, but I think the number one rule is no matter what you're doing, follow your baby. Okay. So if you have somebody telling you, this many seconds with the bottle tilted this way, and then this many seconds with the bottle tilted that way, don't worry about it. Don't overanalyze it. I would do what your baby is kind of saying they need. I have my little demo doll. And so the couple of ways I like to hold a baby for paced feeding, I'm just going to angle my screen down, are either baby kind of upright in your lap, really kind of a 45-degree angle. I see some parents who are able to do this. For whatever reason, I don't feel like personally I get a good, I offer good support of the baby's like neck and head this way. I've seen a lot of dads who are really good at this, and I don't know what it is.
Maybe their bicep is bigger. I don't know.
Maybe, but I like to just do kind of that hold that we do when we're breastfeeding our babies, where you kind of hold the baby from behind. Okay, so I'm supporting this baby by, one ear with my thumb, other ear with my pointer finger, and then kind of my hand is across the small of her back. So I'm really letting her feel good and supported. If your baby is like wiggling around, that tells me they're uncomfortable. A baby is always going to choose trying to get more comfortable, like protecting themselves from falling before they choose feeding. And that's why we see babies who are bottle feeding or breastfeeding, and they're getting really wiggly and they're having a hard time actually coordinating what they need to do, because they're they're even, actually tapping into all those reflexes that help them to,
Parents
not
don't
fall.
Get that so much. I know this isn't a breastfeeding episode, but that is so common, is the baby is just wriggling and moving and the parent thinks that they're frustrated that they can't latch. I'm like, no, they're uncomfortable. And that is like the first thing. If we can get the baby comfortable and the mom comfortable, or the breastfeeding parent comfortable, then we can focus on the latch.
Absolutely. And I think things just fall in place that way. And some of that has to do with like regulated nervous systems and things like that. But I see the same thing sometimes with bottle feeding. And this is a position where sometimes I'll see the baby start wiggling and I'm like, baby doesn't feel supported. Like maybe get a pillow in there back behind baby's back or under your arm. Okay. So I like this 45-degree angle position. I also like a nice sideline position. This is not something I ever used to do. And I've had more and more families who really like this position. Okay. You can use a nursing pillow or a bed pillow, so you're not actually physically holding the baby up in the air. This is something they use in the NICUs a lot for itty bitty babies. And it's stabilizing because you can really just take your elbow, tuck baby in. You can do that same hold with the top of baby's kind of head, neck, and shoulders. And in both positions, you can kind of have baby angled a little bit where they've got a nice open throat, open airway. And then you're going to take your bottle. I do typically like to offer a bottle with an empty nipple first, which sounds a little counterintuitive, but basically that means you can angle the bottle downwards, right? And let the baby suck on an empty nipple for a few seconds. Your baby really should just be breathing this air. They shouldn't be swallowing it. It doesn't make them gassier. I get that question a lot, and I really have never seen that. What I do see, especially with breastfeeding babies, is they are more willing to go back to the breast. And wait for those couple of minutes for a letdown. For whatever reason, this is a trick that has worked for a lot of families. It's interesting. But then you can start offering milk, and you can fill the nipple all the way. You can kind of alternate between full nipple, like partway full, empty, but you're following your baby's lead. And so if I've got a really good full nipple and baby starts to kind of make some noises, like they're starting to feel overwhelmed, don't take the bottle away, just tip it back and slow down the flow of milk. Okay. Sideline, you can absolutely do the same thing. Okay. And I'll just take the bottle like this and kind of tip it up, tip it down. And that's how I'm going to follow baby's lead. Okay. If they have an empty nipple and you can tell like they're impatient, give me some more milk. They're saying, yes, tip it up, give them a little bit more milk. And I find a lot of families like to just follow baby's lead rather than do like 3 seconds up, 3 seconds down, that starts to feel like too kind of mechanical.
My sweet type A mamas are always, or even like dads, whoever's feeding a bottle, they're usually like, okay, but I need exact directions,
right. I know, and it's
that
hard.
exact
it's
number.
Hard.
But you know what? It is so beautiful to try to tap out of the numbers, tap out of the stats, and really just look at your baby and try to figure out what your baby wants.
Absolutely.
Because so much noise goes on around us, and that actually is so distracting from what we're actually doing. So it's a beautiful lesson of just parenthood in general.
No, I agree 100%. I talk to my clients about that in a kind of covering a variety of areas. And maybe that's an area where if you're not confident in being able to read your baby's cues to start off with, you start off using the numbers a little bit, right? Whether that means like you're tracking things in an app or you're timing feeds or you are counting the seconds during a feeding. And then as you feel more confident, you start to drop some of the numbers.
Yeah.
And then you can follow your baby's lead a little bit more. It doesn't have to be like either or, like all the numbers, all following baby. We can kind of find a middle ground there.
So I've had some people explain, I've taken so many classes and everyone teaches different ways, right? And I love continuing education. I don't have anything that requires it, but I really enjoy it. And I've heard people say for paced bottle feeding to remove, you said not to, you don't have to remove, but I've heard them say to remove the bottle and then kind of tap the nipple on the side of the cheek to see if the baby kind of turns toward it again, that they're still hungry. Have you noticed that is helpful, or you think you get just as much sign without taking it out?
I think you can get some pretty good signs without taking the bottle out. And I'm certainly not saying never, but I find that we'll see parents who will let baby go suck, 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 take the bottle away. Suck, 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 take the bottle away.
That's
and they're like, oh, I'm stopping to burp baby, or giving them a second to pause every little bit. And it's like, well, that's not really how we want you to pace the feeding. I think that makes everybody frustrated.
Yeah.
Parents become frustrated. The baby becomes frustrated. Certainly a few breaks here and there, but absolutely fine. I feel like that reduces baby. We have so many times where babies find themselves super frustrated with feeding. And so if we can reduce that and make feeding calmer, no, I hadn't thought too much about kind of like touching the side of baby's face with the nipple as far as seeing if they're still hungry. I see some parents of newborns kind of like, they'll rub their baby's face and see if they keep breathing.
See if they come to it. Yeah.
And I would say for a lot of babies, that's just a reflex, especially in those early days, not necessarily later on. And they're going to, whether they're still hungry or not. So that's kind of where that makes me pause a little bit.
And they may still keep sucking on a nipple just because it feels good to suck on the nipple.
Absolutely.
Even if you don't take it out, you leave it in and you're just kind of going back and forth with it. But eventually they may get satisfied and just kind of start to taper off. So that's helpful.
Yeah. And sucking, as you mentioned, like it does all these great things for babies other than give them food. It releases hormones to help them go to sleep, to make them more comfortable, to reduce pain. So a lot of babies will just keep sucking, even if they're not hungry and not even actively eating anymore.
Yeah. So when people are maybe putting on the registry or purchasing for themselves bottles, how many should they start with? Do you think that there's a certain number that is smart to start with? Or what about sizes? Because sometimes they come, there's a 4-ounce bottle and an 8-ounce bottle, and eventually you're going to need the 8-ounce bottle. Do you just start with those? Should you buy a bunch of different types and brands, or try to just focus on one for now? What do you suggest on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it depends on how much bottle feeding you're planning on doing. If you are going into things knowing you're going to exclusively or pretty much exclusively bottle feed, like, yes, you want a lot more bottles from the get-go. Now, if you're a family who's going to be combo feeding, or you're kind of having bottles on hand just in case we need one in the early weeks, then we'll add in some bottles later on, maybe 4 or 5 just to kind of get started. I tend to recommend maybe getting a few different kinds, but I do, like I mentioned earlier, I like those tapered nipples. I don't think that there's necessarily a reason to get many bottles that fall kind of outside of that category. And I will say that some of the boxes on the market that have a variety of bottles in there typically don't have a lot of bottles that kind of meet those criteria for nipple shape. They usually have a Dr. Brown's in there. I feel like every home has a Dr. Brown's bottle, but other than that, they often have a Komotomo or something else with that really wide neck. Sometimes I'll see like the Avon's Natural Response, which, we were talking about marketing earlier, and that's one that's heavily marketed to breastfed babies. I don't know if you're seeing that one a lot. I honestly don't love Avon or Dr. Brown bottles. Yeah. Well, the Avon bottles, we've had some concerns about, specifically those natural response ones they were new a couple of years ago because they're notoriously slow. They're marketed to be slow for breastfed babies, but they're too slow. And we've actually had a few cases. I've talked to some of my colleagues here about this. When I was reading those Consumer Reports articles, this came up where babies are being underfed because they're working so hard to suck on these bottles that they're not taking appropriate volumes and they're getting tired. Wow. And parents are going, oh, they took, 60 milliliters, 2 ounces. Good, we're good.
That makes so much
tired.
Sense.
But maybe that baby needed 90 milliliters or 3 ounces or more. Yeah. And it makes it hard to read babies' feeding cues. So a lot of folks have actually been writing to even to get them to make some changes, but they have not yet. But I would say that's one I say stay away from, even though it also is in most families' homes that I'm going into these days.
What do you think about hand-me-down bottles?
Like
a neighbor loved theirs and is done having babies and wants to hand me down some bottles. Maybe just buy some new nipples. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends on the bottle. How expensive was that bottle in the first place? How long was it used for? I've definitely had families that have, like you're saying, they've gotten some hand-me-downs and they look like they're in great shape and they've barely been used. I've also seen bins of, a million different really old Dr. Brown's bottles. Well, in that case, either get new nipples or let's probably start over again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always nice when you can get some hand-me-downs if they're good things to hand me down, but there also can be downsides there too.
Right. So right.
That's understandable and helpful. So is there anything else? Did we miss anything that you wanted to share with us about bottles today?
I think we covered most everything that I would have liked to talk about. I really want to just highlight that I think the most important things to look at are bottle nipple shape, flow, which we didn't talk about too much. We just mentioned how that flow rate is not standardized. Generally, you're looking for a slow flow, but yes, there is such thing as a too slow flow bottle. And then we're looking at the method of feeding that the parent is using, because in many cases, when we're blaming the bottle for baby being gassy, it's often just how the baby is taking a bottle, like either what their function is on that bottle nipple or how they're being offered the bottle so that they are maybe leaking a lot of milk or they're swallowing too quickly. And that can create problems with, gassiness and GI distress.
I've actually had parents who get a size 0 nipple, which a lot of them come with size 1s. And again, this is not standardized, but a lot of them come with a 1 when you first buy a bottle. Some even come with the 2. But they go with 1 and 1 sounds like it's the littlest number. And sometimes there's a 0 or a preemie flow nipple. Yeah. And I've actually had some babies who are not born preemie, but do better with the preemie flow nipple because, again, not standardized. And that one is enough to let them get a good amount of food right away. And when someone's also breastfeeding at the same time, they want to make sure that they're not just getting to chug a bottle and then get frustrated at the slower flow of the breast and having to wait for a letdown. So know that, guys, that it's not always a size 1 is not the smallest.
Right. No, for sure.
Sounds the smallest, but it's not.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, can you tell people how they can find more about you? You have lots of awesome educational material online, and I'll also put this in the show notes.
Yeah, perfect. So you can find me on Instagram, heather.eure.ibclc. My website is oxytocinperinatal.com. You will find on my website, I've got some free breastfeeding classes that I tend to offer every month. I'm actually about to put up a recording of my free prenatal breastfeeding class. So feel free to check out my website so you can download the recording. And then I'm always available by email as well, heather@oxytocinperinatal.com.
That's amazing. I didn't know you were going to do that. That's really cool. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to follow, rate, and review the podcast. It helps us reach more families who can benefit from this resource. For more resources, classes, and services, head to empoweredbeginningsatx.com or check out the Birth Baby Academy at birthbabyacademy.com. Until next time, wishing you confidence and calm on your journey through birth and beyond.